This is Discovery, Part 6A. Why people still today study the Bible, its historicity and veracity. And so, just by way of a little background, we've been looking at both internal and external evidences for the veracity of the Bible. Because if we can't trust the Bible, well then why would we want to trust the central character of the Bible? Yeah, we'll get there. And so that's important. And I've come to the conclusion that if the Bible is honestly approached and read, understood, interpreted, and then applied, we should have everything that we need for life. If we fall short in any of those areas, we're going to have some problems. So what I want to do is talk about the Fibonacci ratios. And I've subtitled it Mathematics is Beautiful. But I've got a clip that I want to show you. It really rips into this whole business of God's creative design. So let's have a look at this.
Individuality, the trademark of any artist, designer, or architect. Each desires a uniqueness to their creation, a quality that separates it from any other. Man naturally has this individuality, his fingerprint. There are 6.5 billion people on the face of the earth, and no two fingerprints are the same. Everything we touch or make contact with is branded with a small expressed image revealing to all who see it who was there. Around 1200 AD, a man named Leonardo Pisano, better known as Fibonacci, discovered a sequence of numbers that created a very interesting pattern. The sequence begins with the numbers 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and continues indefinitely. Each number is obtained by adding the last two digits together. A rectangle with a length and width of any two of the numbers of this sequence forms what is known as the golden rectangle, a perfect rectangle. A golden rectangle can be broken down into squares the size of the next Fibonacci numbers down and below. If we were to take a perfect or golden rectangle, break it down into smaller squares based on Fibonacci's sequence, and divide each with an arc, the patterns begin to take shape. We begin to see Fibonacci's spiral. The spiral in and of itself is insignificant. Its importance is revealed in where we find it. Take, for example, the sunflower. The display of its florets are in perfect spirals of 55, 34, and 21, the sequence of Fibonacci. The fruitlets of the pineapple create this same spiral based on the sequence. The pine cone does the same. As currents move through the ocean and the tide rolls onto the shore, the waves that bring in the tide curve into a spiral that can be mathematically diagrammed onto a plot at the points 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and 55. Buds on trees, sand dollars, starfish, petals on flowers, and especially the nautilus shell are formed with this exact same blueprint. With each segment of growth, the nautilus adds to itself one more value on Fibonacci's scale. This blueprint can be seen around us on a small scale every day, but the greatest example of all is directly above our heads. At an average of 100,000 light years across, even the spiral of the galaxies above us are formed with the exact design that the tiny shell is formed. This sequence, or blueprint, appears to be the trademark of a designer, a proof of a creator, something left behind indicating the one who was there, a fingerprint. As we scan our universe, from the tiny flower to the awe-inspiring galaxy, we see the fingerprint of God.
Wow. The Fibonacci ratio. So we're going to try and get our heads around it a little bit with some explanation, but don't worry about whether you can remember the ratios or anything. Just get the general picture that there is a design there which is fascinating. As you can see, I've subtitle of mathematics is beautiful. There's something beautiful, there's something pleasing to the eye that crops up in this whole thing. So here it is in written form. A fascinating numerical property found in God's creation is called the Fibonacci sequence, as we saw in the clip. Popularized by Leonardo of Pisa in the 13th century, the sequence looks like this as follows: 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on. Now the third term is the sum of the first two. So don't worry about the mathematics yet. Don't start to freak out. Then the fourth term is the sum of the second and the third. So you've got 1 plus 1 equals 2. Then if you go 1 plus 2, it'll equal 3. Then if you go 2 plus 3, it'll equal 5. And if you go 5 plus 3, it'll equal 8, and so on. So it's kind of, you step back and then you add, and then you step back and then you add, and you keep going that way. And then when you represent it on a geometry type of scale, on a flat scale rather than a number scale, you get this kind of picture. You get a progression from 1 there, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34. And so if the Nautilus shell grows bigger and bigger, it will go up the Fibonacci scale according to a particular pattern. Now, obviously, there are going to be some anomalies that when you pick something up off the beach, that it might have been broken, or there might have been some malformation because of disease or something like that. But in general, the pattern is like that. It's absolutely fascinating. So, in the video clip, basically, we saw that the number patterns occur repeatedly in nature, in the spiral arrangement of plants and fruits, in the Nautilus shell too. And Sue's got an example around her neck. Everyone turn around and have a look at Sue. She's got the Nautilus shell. So if you want in the break to have a look at a real one that's been, is it a real one that's been filled up? Yes, yeah. Anyway, so you get that. You get it in spiral galaxies, you get it in cyclones or hurricanes and everything. But here's a picture of the Nautilus shell that you saw quickly in the clip there. Starting again, 1, 2, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on as it gets bigger. It's absolutely amazing. So when you look at the pictures of plant matter, you've got the sunflower seed, florets, or whatever they call them there. I don't know what particular plant is here, but you can see a spiral effect there. You can see a plant that grows, you know, even here in the northwest. You've got those ferns that uncurl. And there's a rose with a spiral, a pattern there that is evident. Look at this one now in human anatomy terms. Look at the ear. Turn around, have a look at someone's ear. Don't look too closely at this one on the left here, but there are proportions there. You know, it's drawn differently. This is a famous one that Leonardo da Vinci drew, but it's got various ratios that correspond with the Fibonacci ratios. And it's not shown that clearly on that particular drawing, but nevertheless it's there. Here you've got a hurricane or a cyclone, depending on which hemisphere you're in, with that ratio there, and then a galaxy on the right. Well, when you consider geometry, and geometry has to do with things on the two planes like this, A plus B and A plus B and so on, you get back in Greek terms and mathematical terms, you get the Greek letter phi, they call it, or pi. Is it phi or pi? Phi. What was that? Pi. Okay, pi. And when you calculate it out with all their fancy calculations, you get a ratio of 1.618. So don't worry about the details once again, just get the general drift that there are patterns and there's design there that seems to be consistent across a number of aspects of the world in which we live and which we believe God created. So mathematically, when the smaller number of this pattern is divided into the larger number adjacent to it, the ratio, the connection between the two numbers, is approximately 1.618. That's what it's saying in verbal terms. And the Greek sculptor and architect by the name of Phidias, let's call him, 450 BC. Now this is 2,000 years ago plus another 450 years back. So it's 2,500 years ago they were coming up with an understanding of all the stuff that's going on. And others in ancient Greece and Egypt, because they've connected it to the pyramids too. How they build things and the ratios of the angles and everything there. They often use this ratio in designing many of their works of art and architecture. So why is it so? Because this ratio has been found to be remarkably pleasing to the human eye. That's why I subtitled it earlier on, Mathematics is Beautiful. And when I was at high school, mathematics wasn't beautiful, it was a problem. But when you look at it, and there's a guy who talks on TED Talks, he talks about Fibonacci ratio. So if you go to TED Talks and you type in Fibonacci, you'll come up with a guy who makes mathematics seem fun. But we're looking at it from the beauty point of view, and from the point of view of a creator who's trying to communicate with us what he's like. And he is beautiful, and he's perfect in all of his ways. So if creation is one of his ways, and one of the things that he's done, there's going to be beauty wrapped up in it. And certainly they found this pleasing proportion, which has come to be known as the golden rectangle. On the short side, if the short side of the rectangle is 1, the long side would be 1.618, which is what we found. And so when you look at the ancient Greek Parthenon, you have the Fibonacci spiral and the proportions, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 30, whatever the next one is. That's what it's pleasing to the eye. If the proportions were otherwise, if it was stretched this way, if you took it on a computer and you stretched it this way and you made it elongated, then it looks a little bit funky. So there are proportions and balances in creation, God's creation, as in the plants and everything else, the waves and the galaxies, as well as man's creations reflecting that, which we see here. Looking now at the Eiffel Tower, for example, there's the golden ratio when you extend it vertically. There's a ratio there that fits in with the figures there. The Parthenon, as we see. And then here's, I think, is a gallery or a hotel or whatever where they've done a spiral staircase. And they do it according to the Fibonacci ratio. And it kind of looks pretty neat. Beautiful, you could say, from a mathematical point of view. Well, why don't we jump into the world of Leonardo da Vinci's art now and have a look at our friend, Mona Lisa. Wow, look at that. The whole circle starts on the outside there, and when you calculate it out and you superimpose it, you land up at the center of her face, because when you look at your face, if everything is in perfect proportion, which it is with this group, okay, your nose is at the center of everything. And it seems as if Leonardo da Vinci, because we don't have anything in his writings to prove it, but it seems as if as a mathematician, which he was, and an inventor, as well as a brilliant artist and thinker, he incorporated it into his art. It's amazing. So what's the big deal about all of this? Well, as I've been approaching it all along, I believe we've got to contrast it between this whole business of chance, where it just all pops out of natural chance, or design, with God in the center of that picture. So I want to look a little bit more at science, evolution, and now the second law of thermodynamics. And if you wonder whether you came to the wrong lecture tonight, just relax. We are going to get through it. You're not going to be tested on it, and you'll find something interesting. Let's have a look at the first point here. If science asserts, and science does in many cases, that the universe had a beginning, like the Big Bang, and then has evolved from nothing into the incredible complexity that we talked about a couple of sessions ago today, then it goes against itself in this way. The second law of thermodynamics, as understood and communicated and respected by many very clever scientists, it involves the study of matter and energy, and shows effectively the bottom line of this second law of thermodynamics, like the law of gravity. When you jump off a building and go down, you don't float up. Okay, so this is a law of thermodynamics. Thermo got something to do with temperature and energy and matter and so on. When you look at it, it shows effectively that the universe is really running out of a limited amount of energy. Now, they do it with long calculations and long formulas, which you and I are not going to look at tonight. But it's like a wound-up clock. if you take a mechanical clock, not one that you put a battery in, although batteries wear down too. If you wind up a clock, there's a limited amount of energy that you put into, by virtue of your arm, into the coil, and then it winds down. It's kind of like things are winding down. Now, the first law of thermodynamics, if you jump backwards a little bit, states that there's a constant amount of energy in the universe. That is, material energy is limited. It's not unending. There's not an injection of energy from somewhere, a new battery being put in, someone winding it up. The universe appears to be winding down from a point of limited energy. Now, put another way, in different language, the second law of thermodynamics is also known as the law of entropy. So don't get bogged down with the details, just try and follow the thought here. Showing that in nature, things tend towards increasing state of disorder in nature. It's like taking thrown out food in a compost heap that I've got at home, for example. What does it do? It doesn't slowly grow up into a nice orchard of apple trees. It rots downwards into compost, right? It breaks down, much like other things in life start to break down, like us. As we get older, things begin to sag. We have dresser disease. Our chest falls into our drawers. Except, of course, if you're Greg. And that's an inside joke which you'd have to find out. Anyway, that is why we need a lift, ladies and men and everybody, a lift, because things are winding down in nature. You get a start and then it winds down. You get another jolt and then it winds down. It's like coffee, caffeine jolt. Evolutionary theory now, let's get back to evolution a little bit now, requires increasing order, not disorder, increasing order out of disorder, simply by chance. And it thus flies in the face of its own science that it's supposed to connect with. Making any sense at all? Some of you got looks on your face.
The evolutionary theory? Sorry.
Requires increasing order out of disorder simply by chance. So, if something is going to evolve from, let's say, an amoeba or some slime or goo, it's going to get from that to something that's got more order, and then some more order, and then more complexity and more order. And it's going to go upwards rather than downwards, which is what the other laws are trying to show us. So this flies in the face of the law of entropy, or the second law of thermodynamics, where everything seems to be winding down. So when you look at the scenario now, which they put in school textbooks and on the web and magazines, and they laugh at you as if you're an absolute idiot if you don't believe this, that you've got the monkey over there, and then the whatever over there, and there, and there, and there, and eventually the guy is walking down the street, hopefully with some clothes on, talking on his cell phone. You've got this evolutionary from lesser order and complexity to increasing order and complexity. Just the opposite of what those laws are trying to tell us. Now, funnily enough, I come from South Africa and I used to play not American football but rugby, and I've played with some of those guys before. They look like that. They behave like that. And nowadays, I've slowly evolved into leaving rugby behind, and I do have a cell phone with me. So maybe this theory is true. I'm just kidding. I'm just playing. Okay, so theologically now, how can we connect this with what we understand about the Bible? Sin was introduced, and decay and death followed. Genesis 1 says that when God made everything, it was good. But when man fell and sin was introduced, what followed? Death and decay. Wasn't good. Wow, interesting. So that's why when someone gets saved or accepts the Lord, there is an injection of life from the outside of that person. You can't, through your good works and through self-help projects or whatever, become full of life. You can modify your behavior that it looks like that way to other people. But really, supernaturally, through the work of the Holy Spirit, there is an injection of life into your spirit that makes a difference. That it even changes people's countenances when they get saved. That sin has been weighing them down, contorting their face, bringing a darkness upon them that you can literally, tangibly see. But when they get saved, it all turns around. Interesting. Now there's a deposit that takes place because we're going to need this decaying body to be resurrected and connect up with the perfectly life-injected spirit man, and then our minds have to be renewed, and then it all come into sync, and then we live on for eternity in that blissful state there. But that's why I believe we need a new heaven. When you take the earth and the universe and all the stuff, the asteroids and comets and things smashing into each other, and hurricanes and whatever, when we get a new heaven and a new earth that God will create, it will re-energize everything, and where no sin will be present to corrupt and start it running down again. So I like to see it in this way in terms of the scripture. In Isaiah chapter 65, verses 17 and 18, from the Old Testament now, way back then, this is what it says. This is the prophecy now. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things will not be remembered or come to mind. Isn't that interesting? All the bad stuff that gives us such a hard time here and now, when we get there and the new heavens and new earth, you won't remember it. That's a good thing. Because you don't want to be sitting in heaven where everything is fine, thinking back, oh my goodness, I've got so many regrets about what happened and why did this and everything. And it just screws you up for eternity. There'll come a time, now we can get close to it now if we want to, and discipline ourselves and take every thought captive and so on. But boy, up there, when God creates it and it's new and everything, whew, be glad. But be glad and rejoice forever in what I create. That's what it says in the scripture. Revelations 22 echoes this. This is the New Testament prophecy about this future scenario. And I saw, the Apostle John, a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. New heaven, something that's not there been before. It's not just renovated, it's new. Wow. A fresh and lasting injection of new life. An insertion from the God who lives outside of space, outside of time, and outside of matter, interacts with it and injects new life into it. And so pictorially, some people represent it in terms of the city of God coming down there, coming down in a new heaven and a new earth. It's just beautiful colors, freshness. Okay, so I want to talk now a little bit about the supernatural in preparation for our last session, part B, 6B. And the supernatural is defined as that which is above or beyond the laws of nature as we scientifically understand them. Now, the Bible teaches that God is outside of time, space, and matter, having created. That's what I said just now. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, that's time, God, that's the one outside of it, created the heavens and the earth. That's matter, with the energy that he spoke into it. And the modern Western rationalistic or maybe natural way of thinking, secular way of thinking, and science-based society often discounts the supernatural altogether. They say, no, if I can't see it, touch it, taste it, it doesn't exist. Can't measure it. And yet, the rest of the world, and there's probably upwards of 7 billion people on the planet at this time, the rest of the world is not going to buy into that. People in India, Africa, South America, and increasingly in the West now as an undercurrent returns, they believe in the supernatural all the time. There's billions of people who don't agree with this modern Western approach where everything is just matter and it's molecules and that's it, and we just measure it, and we're the product of our programming, and so we just need to change programming, and if we've got a problem, just give them a pill for every ill in the mind, and away we go. Anyway, increasingly, as I said, within our own modern culture here in the West, there's a resurgence of interest in the supernatural. And even scientific studies today now show connections between the natural and the supernatural, and quantum physics and all that sort of stuff come into the picture. And what we've got here, they're doing experiments, double-blind statistical experiments, where it says that the positive benefits of prayer are measurable in medical situations. And they've even gone so far as in the area of, in the charismatic movement and everything, they've even measured and can calibrate and look at brain waves and things that go on physiologically when people start to speak in tongues, which is a supernatural utterance that people have. That is a gift given as a gift by God. It's not something that they cook up because they're demonically inspired, or they're hallucinating, or just had too much caffeine or pizza the night before. It's actually a supernatural utterance that God gives you. And so it's fascinating what's going on. And not even these natural-based atheists or scientists who assert that these natural laws are unchanging and that this stuff doesn't happen, they come up with conclusions that are completely out of the box as far as I'm concerned. So what they do when it comes to the supernatural is they start beforehand and exclude the supernatural at the gate in any discussion. And they've done no scientific experimentation or can cite any scientific experimentation to support their argument. They just say the supernatural doesn't exist, and so therefore we must stick to doing this over here in the natural realm. Well, when these supposedly impartial scientists and philosophers flat out discount the supernatural, it appears to be more a matter of what they believe or don't believe, rather than the verifiable science according to their own established practices of research. So they claim to be scientists, they have all of these big degrees behind their name, they strut around in scientific circles, they publish journals and things like that, they go to conferences, they write books, it's published everywhere worldwide, and yet they start off with saying there's no supernatural without any proof whatsoever. Fascinating. Now today we have microscopes, we have telescopes, we have MRI imaging, we have X-ray machines, and other modern instrumentation that peers into realms, when you look at it over a historical time, that we never saw before, way beyond our normal five senses. So, back in the day, they thought that things went bad and penicillin grew spontaneous generation. But now we look under a microscope over here, and we know that there are little bugs crawling around doing this stuff, germs and so on, and bacteria that form this over there. It's not just a matter of saying, I can't see it, so therefore it must be this, or it must be that. And come up with a completely wrong conclusion. So we've got microscopes looking downwards and to small scales, telescopes looking upwards and outwards, and so on. Here's got the Hubble telescope in space that's able to get outside the atmosphere and past the pollution and the water vapor and everything and just look out into space so much further than before, seeing all of these galaxies going on and giving us increasing knowledge that seems to be pointing, if you're honest, and you don't start at the beginning by ruling out the supernatural with God at the center of that, the creator of that. They're starting to see stuff that just points all the time towards patterns, towards design, towards intelligence, basically towards God, in my view. So when we are open to the supernatural possibilities of God's creation and miracle dealings with man, then it's easy from there. It's kind of downhill. Like if you believe in creation, then it's downhill from that point. And so if you discount, on the other hand, the supernatural, you'll have a problem with the miracles that the Bible talks about. You're going to start from the point of view, I just can't wrap my head around the virgin birth of Jesus, for example. Hasn't happened. I don't see anyone around me here, so therefore it couldn't happen. No, that's not the right conclusion. Same with the resurrection. Now, a miracle, if we had to define it, is a special act of God that interrupts the natural course of events. It can interrupt it. This is the way things have been going, and then suddenly this happens. And you can't explain it. You can't measure it. Well, then that's defined as a miracle. Virgins don't conceive, right? And dead people don't rise from the dead. It's pretty much a standard conclusion, right? So I've got a little box here, and this little box might explain things to a degree in terms of an analogy, to explain the universe. is the box open or closed? Have a look at it. It's closed, right? But when you look at it from the perspective of God and the supernatural and what He's revealed to us, the universe is not seen as a closed box. It's seen as an open one. And when the box is open, then He can reach in supernaturally and move things around here in the box. And we call that a miracle because it won't move anyway. But if we're open to an understanding of it, we say God is intervening. He intervened once on a rare occasion with Mary, and we had the virgin birth, conception, immaculate conception. And then He intervened with Jesus, and He was raised from the dead on His own through no other agency. Amazing. It's a miracle. So, when He does it, reaches into the box, we call that a miracle. But if He tells you beforehand that it's going to happen, and gives a record of it, and it's passed on down through the Bible, like Old Testament prophecies, and now New Testament prophecies of what yet to come, well, we call that a prophecy. It's amazing. So just as a conclusion of this session, before we take a quick break, I believe it takes more faith to disbelieve God and His Word than to believe Him and it. Okay. Thank you. It's break time.